I hope people's breaks were less eventful than mine. So I'm going to introduce Leneh. Leneh has been involved in the autistic community for nearly 25 years. She has worked with autistic people since 2004. Sorry. My son's watching a really loud cartoon, and I was hoping that he'd shut the door because now that is in the recording. I'm really sorry. So she's worked with autistic people since 2004, largely in a leadership capacity to create and manage Autiscape. Autiscape is a large annual residential event for autistic people. Working on Autiscape has included working with a majority autistic committee and accommodating the diverse needs of hundreds of autistic participants. And I can confirm that it is a very diverse bunch of people that attend Autiscape. This has led to some degree of expertise in how to get autistic people to do stuff. Following degrees in neuroscience, psychology, and bioethics, Leneh is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Manchester, looking at initiation impairments, inertia, in autistic people, and works part-time as a research consultant. She was also a parent of 4 neurodivergent young people and the family's token NT. So I'm going to hand over to Leneh now. Leneh will be speaking live. This is recorded, and we will stop recording for the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Unmute, that's a good start. So thank you, KB, for the introduction. Those in the audience, I guess you might be reluctant to put your cameras on in case you get caught on the recording, but I don't think that's how it works. And if anybody wants to have a camera on, that makes me really happy, because then I'm not just talking to a screen full of little black boxes. So thanks anybody for a reaction. So I've got a few of you. Thank you. It really helps. So I'm going to be talking about herding cats, sloths, and butterflies. So years ago, when I was chair of Autiscape, I was dubbed the cat herd, because organizing autistics or programmers or quite a few other groups is like herding cats. But I've extended that now. I don't think that people are one or another. I've identified most people as being a combination, but this is different ways of working with autistic workers. And I am on the Discord and will happily chat with anyone afterwards. So this is what I'm going to talk about. An introduction, brief, productivity, so autistic productivity, ways of working, and a conclusion. So it's not got a lot of sections. So introduction. So KB's already said most of it, but why am I qualified to talk about autistic people working together? I manage a large autistic family with one NT oddball, poor thing. Luckily, she's moved out and she's happier now. No, she loves us all. And that is actually a lot of working together with autistic people, because I've got 5 children. So 4 of them are neurodivergent, 3 have diagnoses, and 1 is currently awaiting assessment. And they're very different from each other. So that's a very intense experience of working together with other neurodivergent people. I've been working with the National Autistic Task Force for, I think it's 3 years, but somebody might know more, it might be 4. And the National Autistic Task Force work on making life better for autistic people who have high support needs and limited autonomy. So often people with limited communication skills and who are sidelined and locked up by society because they behave in unpredictable ways to them. And I've been with Autistic for now 17 years, which is a bit shocking. And it's now attended by over 200 autistic people. And when we were online, there were up to 400 autistic people, including infants up to people in their 80s. I don't think we've ever had anyone in their 90s. So often when we think about getting together and having an autistic space, we imagine something where everyone will be like us and it will all be lovely. Everyone will understand me because we're all autistic, and it will be quiet and peaceful. And I will have space to myself. And all my problems will be irrelevant. Unfortunately, reality is a little bit different from that. And autistic people are highly varied. So some people you'll relate to and others you won't. It may or may not be quiet and peaceful because some autistic people have auditory sensitivities and want it quiet. Other autistic people are sensory seekers and want it loud. And some autistic people are sensitive but like to make noise themselves. And all want to be able to control it themselves. So this can cause environmental issues. This is part of the reason that my ex-husband is X. And will I have space to myself? Well, most of us want space to ourselves, but some have difficulty understanding others' boundaries. So one of the things we do at Autistic is to make those really explicit by having badges that say whether you are willing to be asked for a hug or whether you're willing to be asked for a quote. And that doesn't mean that you have to say yes, but it makes the rules explicit. Then it gets a little bit complicated because we've got badges for everything. And while some people's problems that they have in their normal life disappear when they're in an autistic space, others continue to have difficulty in any context, including inertia and getting overloaded. So, and then if you have only autistic people, there is the question of who will do the work. My family, very neurodivergent, are supported by NTs that do some of the mundane things that we have more difficulty with. So there are some pluses and minuses of autistic space. There's tolerance for unusual behavior. So if you have unusual behavior, you can expect it to be more tolerated in autistic space. But that also means that you are required to be tolerant. You can have your personal space, but sometimes no one initiates. So another thing we have at Autistic are initiation badges, including green ones that say, I would really like to talk to someone, but I can't initiate. So please talk to me. You might have shared experiences and interests, but you also might not be able to get a word in because of info dumping, monologuing. And sometimes an interaction with an autistic person can seem a bit like an interrogation. I think those are largely people who've been taught to interact by NTs who say, ask them about their house and ask them about their pets and ask them. So what you get is a list of questions instead of a conversation. And there's space to manage your own needs. So if you don't want to be disturbed, you won't be, especially if you have something like a badge system and you have a red badge that says, don't interact with me, then if you're in distress and wearing a red badge, no one will interact with you. People will take this to an extreme. So even if you wish someone would, they won't, they'll respect the badge. And sometimes no one notices that you're distressed, which has made some people annoyed at Autistic that they were upset and nobody seemed to react to it. But that's because we know that often people don't want a reaction and they really appreciate the lack of it. So it cuts both ways, unfortunately. And it's nice to be normal for a change. Everybody's autistic, you can fit in, and it's just not weird to have autistic needs. But that's also a minus, being normal for a change. Some people, especially people who have been diagnosed young and have had a lot of adjustments, young people who've been in mainstream school are often used to other people making adjustments for them. And then they find themselves at Autistic or in other autistic spaces, and people say, well, yes, that need is just like everyone else. You know, manage yourself, you get in line. People aren't going to be able to bend as much. So just being one of the crowd, having your needs met mainly by the generic systems in place. So productivity and getting the most from an autistic team. There are differences in skill distribution. There are rare skills for autistic people. I mentioned this earlier in the chat. Rare skills include sending posts, making phone calls, and writing letters. So these things, you won't find as many autistic people who can do them as in the general population. On the other hand, you won't have to look very hard for computer skills and error checking and research. So you'll find many autistic people good at these things, and you might have to look quite hard for people who are good at phone calls, interfacing with NTs and things like that. So when you get someone who has those skills and is interested in helping you organize, grab them and make whatever adjustments they need, because they're really valuable. So forests and trees, a little tendency to focus on details. So you can't see the wood for the trees, is commonly said about autistics. And maybe not even the trees, but the third leg of the fly on the other side, underside of the leaf on the bottom branch of the second tree to the left. So details. Details are important. We like producing things that are perfect down to the finest detail. We like receiving things that are perfect down to the finest detail. This is great unless you get completely locked into it and you're working on, if the purpose is to mow the lawn and you're cutting it with nail scissors, there may be an issue. Depth and focus. So this is one of autism's biggest strengths, is being able to focus on things. On the other hand, you get perfectionism, where it's never quite good enough, and often having to do something to produce something for other people, like running a group or an event, or like running this event, it means an exercise in anti-perfectionism. When is it good enough? When is it most important to get the information out, rather than making sure that it's perfect to every detail? And there's a tendency for autistic leaders to be micromanagers and wanting to control the details of everything. I include myself in this. And one of my hardest lessons as chair of Autscape for many years was working out how to delegate and what the limits are of how to make it so that the thing that I delegate still comes out to a standard that I'm okay with. So defining the exact task that you want somebody else to do, and making that big enough that they feel like they've got control over it. And autistic people have great appreciation for quality. This is actually something I did, a little project where I surveyed autistic people's values, and this hadn't come up when they surveyed NTs, but it was a big thing for autistics. They're like, I don't care whether I'm famous, and I don't care whether I make lots of money. I care whether I make something that's good. And that matters. So autistic people can also tend to be inflexible. Once you've done something the same way twice, that's it. So always be careful what you do twice. What you do it once, you can sometimes get away with changing. So every year I manage to introduce one new thing to Autscape, and we have a trial, but I don't tell them that we're having a trial of a new thing, because if you draw their attention to it, it'll be automatically, oh no, that's horrible because it's new. Some things work and some things don't, but you can't be changing too many things at once. Autistic people need evidence before changing, but if they have the evidence, they will often change. So if you can give an explanation of your reasoning, that helps a lot. Give autistic people time to adjust. We all know this. And time to process. So if you're having meetings, this is a battle between inertia and processing time. So if the person producing your agendas tends to be on the inert side and get everything done at the very last second, and the people in the meeting need to make decisions, but they haven't seen the items for the decisions in advance, then you get people who refuse to make decisions because they haven't seen stuff early enough to understand it. So this can be a tricky thing to balance. Consider that other people might have a point, because we tend to make to build our opinions based on reasoning and not just emotions, then we tend to think that those are the right ones because they've been based on strong reasoning. But it's possible to reason the same thing and come to a different conclusion. And organization. So this is an ADHD desk. There are different approaches to organization. Some autistic people won't know where to start, and others will organize to the tiniest detail. Some will break down a task into so many pieces that they can't find the first step, and some have a big blob of lots to do and can't break it down. And often what we do is not well documented because we'd have to stop doing it in order to write down the stuff that we've done. So you can find that things that have been working for a while for autistics, you say, well, how did you do it? What did you do? Why do you do this that way? And nobody's got any writing that explains why things happened that way. And autistic communication. So pluses and minuses again. Autistic people tend to focus on the content, but may miss nuances. So sometimes you have to work a bit harder at seeing the gray area, seeing different options. We tend to like things in text, but text is often slower than talking. We often are slow to process and plan and respond to things, and then sometimes we may not respond at all. So we've had to work out what to do if somebody doesn't respond. How long can we leave them not responding and still consider them to be a board member? How can we have meetings when people can't come up with words fast enough? So Autopia has meetings in text entirely, not text supported voice chat, because they work at different paces. So it can be hard to do like a Zoom chat with people, a Zoom call with people in the chat. The chat almost always gets sidelined because it takes longer and you have to shift your attention to go and read what's in the chat. So Autopia's made the decision to do everything in text, which doesn't suit everyone, but it suits the chair, which is the most important. So until somebody else is going to take over as chair, text meetings it is. And we need a balance between detail and clarity because it can be overwhelming to get too much detail. And there is definitely a tendency to give too much information, and it can be quite hard to strike that balance. It helps if you put things in a hierarchy, so you get the basic information just by reading the headlines, and then you can read more detail by choice, because some people want every possible detail and some people just want to know, what do I need to do? So cats, sloths, and butterflies. Cats, this is one very common set of characteristics in autistic people. They tend to have high standards. They tend to be independent-minded, just like cats. They may not express needs and feelings until there's already a problem. So this is true of my actual cat that I had for 17 years, and you'd be stroking her and everything is fine, and then suddenly she tries to take your hand off. And there are cat-like autistic people who will go along with everything, it just seems fine, and then they blow their top at you because actually you've overstepped. They don't like too much supervision. So for the leader, this is an exercise in delegation. They may be quite likely to end up in leadership roles, and unfortunately, they might forget that there's a team. So it helps to have procedures in place so that the team have a way of saying, wait a minute, I'm here, I need to have jobs and responsibilities. What cats need is autonomy. So they need a job that has clear boundaries of what needs to be done, and then the freedom to do it their own way, and a deadline by which they need to have it done so that you can give them a nudge if they haven't. But don't keep checking in. If you keep checking in with a cat, then they'll dig their heels in and you won't get anything out of them. They have a lack of herding and following qualities, and they can get fixated on ideas and make collaboration challenging. So cats, like everyone, especially autistic people, need clear communication. So that part of this is to be very clear about what it is that you need doing and when you need it done by and what will happen if it doesn't. So sloths. I'm a bit of an expert in autistic inertia. I know quite a bit about sloths. I am part cat, part sloth myself. So sloths, slow people. They produce very high quality work, but they take forever to do it. They only get moving in an emergency. And unfortunately, different people will consider an emergency to have started at different times. So I tend to panic much earlier than my partner does because I consider it to be an emergency. He's like, well, it's not an emergency yet because it's not happening until tomorrow. So, you know, whereas I might be quite concerned 3 days ahead. They may not seem to care, but actually often care a lot more than it looks like. They just can't get their enthusiasm up in a way that you can see. But the caring can be very deep. It's just quiet. And sloths need prompting, not pressure. So you can come to an agreement with the person you're trying to work with about what sort of prompting will help, with an understanding that if you do it wrong, they will tell you, because if you get your prompts wrong, it can often make things worse. Like, oh, now that you've told me to do it, it's impossible. I can't possibly do it. Lowering thresholds, which means make it easy to get started. Provide all the information that somebody needs. So never refer to the email that you sent last week to some other attachment, some other link. Always put it back in the one that you want them to respond to. Get started on something. Draft a document and then give it to them to sort out. And have patience and deadlines and tolerance. So deadlines are important, but the person has to believe in them. You can't make arbitrary deadlines and say, oh, let's say that we need it a week before, because if they don't believe in it, it won't work, can't be done. And it's fatal to say, oh, that's okay if you haven't read it. Oh, that's all right if you're not ready, because then it's impossible to get the work done. You have to be reasonably flexible, but also fairly rigid. So it's quite hard work, and you can learn, but there will be mistakes along the way, for sure. So having a tolerance for making mistakes, that's quite hard for us, but it's essential. And butterflies. So these are flighty sorts, obviously, the ones who tend to have more ADHD traits. They're great at drafts and initiative and ideas. They can drag sloths along with them. They can come up with exciting things to do. But their most helpful thing, in my experience, is that they will come up with drafts. The draft will be rubbish, but at least they've written it. And they have poor follow through. So they'll start things, but they won't finish them. But the sloths and the cats are much better at finishing things. They will often get a lot done in a short time. It happens to be 5 minutes before it's due, but at least it's getting done. And they do tend to be error prone, but often less sensitive about correction than other people, other autistics. And so to manage the butterflies in your life or on your committee, they need reminders. So some people might seem to need reminders, but what they really need is a nudge. They've remembered, but they just haven't got started. But these ones are more likely to have actually forgotten completely that the thing even needed doing. So they need a reminder. They're the kind of the opposite of cats. They're better off with small tasks. So you can give them something, can you just do this? And not a long list or a complicated thing that they have to organize. You know, I need to make this phone call or to write this list or to send an email. And they need proofreading because they make more errors than average. So they need a good proofreader. Luckily, proofreaders are abundant. Proofreading is a common skill for autistic people. So here are your take-home messages. Working with autistics. So you might have paradoxical abilities and unexpected deficits. So people may seem to be seriously able in some ways and not in others. I've had many people say, oh, I wish I could help with organizing Autscape, but you're also much more able than I am. I'm too disabled for that. Well, actually, I have a lot of support to get through my day-to-day life. I depend on social care. I'm very disabled with inertia. That's my main issue. And so it's not necessarily a matter of who has the biggest impairment, or it's also how you work and how motivated you are and what matters. So autistic people will often need more supervision, although some need less, and help with administrative tasks. So this is where it can be convenient to get an NT involved, especially when you can it's possible to have NTs on your committee and to still have autistic people in charge. So we have one neurodivergent, non-autistic person, and she's quite good at venue coordinator because she has a slightly better interface with NT skills. Lower the thresholds for communication and initiative, make it easier to get started, provide all the information in one place. Don't deny weaknesses, work around them. So pretending that you're just going to suddenly snap out of it and not have your characteristics is not going to get the job done. Reinvent ways of working rather than just following traditional neurotypical ways. So things like having text meetings, having fewer meetings or more, not meeting at all. Find those with complementary skills and rare skills and nab them and coerce them into joining your group. If you can't do something, tell someone. So this is one of the most important things that we really emphasize when somebody joins, because the most harmful thing to getting the job done is when somebody can't do it, but instead of telling you that, they hide and stop responding. It's difficult, I know, to admit that, no, I can't do this thing that I agreed to do. But if as soon as you do that, somebody else can either help or do it. And be organized. Well, you can say that, but make lists and keep on top of things by writing stuff down as much as possible. Talk to each other. And why is it worth the trouble? Because normal is context dependent. It's very nice for autistic people to be the normal ones for a change and to work with other people who have compatible communication. It's often easier to meet mutual needs. So because you understand why somebody has a sort of difficulty that they do. And it's nice to feel accepted, of course, feeling understood and not different or defective. More likely to have compatible communication. This is one of the main advantages of working with other autistic people. And it's nice to be able to find others who work similarly and have similar experiences. So that's the end of my presentation. We can